Today in art journaling, we're actually not going to start in our journal. What we're going to focus on today is creating material for other art journaling projects. So we're going to be doing kind of a prep session today. We're going to focus on paper dyeing. Usually when we talk about dyeing, we talk about fiber dyeing, right? And we usually think about fabric. But paper is also a fiber, and there's a lot of fun that we can have with this process specifically. Now, I want to talk, before we even talk about our supplies, I want to talk about this process to kind of just start off, get our mind going, and then we'll talk about supplies and get started. But first, I want to invite us to pull some inspiration from this really wonderful Japanese fiber dyeing practice called Shibori. Now, if you've been with us for a while, you've probably heard me talk about it, but Shibori is this traditional Japanese resist dyeing process. Shibori literally means to wring, to squeeze, or to press. And so it's all about how we prepare our fabric for the dyeing process. Now, traditionally, it's done with indigo pigment from the indigo plant, and it's done on silk. But there's a lot that we can pull from this practice. There's so many different types of shibori folds, and I'm going to talk about a few of them. But the truth is, the folds themselves don't matter. It's just this idea that you can kind of change how your fiber will look by how you fold or prepare your material. And so we're going to kind of walk through that together. But to start off, I wanted to show some of the traditional folds that are out there. So the first one is this Kumo pattern, and this is one that we've probably seen before. It's called a bullseye pattern. It's the Kumo. And this is one that starts with rings. This is probably what we're most familiar with. If we're familiar with tie-dye, we've probably seen this before. But this is all about tying either twine or rubber bands to create this resist pattern before you dip it in the pigment, right? So you get a really nice kind of ring bullseye pattern. Now there's another pattern that's very similar to this, and it's called Kanoko, and it's where the rings are separated instead of one inside the other. And it's still made the same way, where you're pulling a bunch of the fabric and you're tying the rubber band or the twine around it to create that resist, right? So that's one. Another one is called the Itajime, and this one is really nice because this is an example of that. This one's really nice because it's basically an accordion fold. If you know how to make a paper fan, you can basically do this project pretty easily. It creates these really nice lines. And again, because you're using that indigo pigment, you're getting to see this really deep, rich blue purple color. And because it's about folding, you're not going to get the same color all the way across. So you get these really wonderful variations that come through it. And I think that's one of the really nice things about this process too. You kind of have an idea about how it'll turn out, but it's always something new when you actually open it. There's a little surprise in that reveal. Every time I do, even if it's the exact same process with the exact same material, the look is always different. So I think that's something that's really special about this process, just in general. But the last one I want to kind of talk about is called the Arashi. And this is one that really is kind of a wave pattern. And it's all about the twisting and scrunching to get this really nice wave. Now, again, it changes depending on, let me do it this way. There we go. So it changes depending on how you ring it, how you fix it, how you like what you tie around it. But this is kind of that really wonderful pattern that you get from that process. Now, again, not every time does it turn out this way, but these are really good examples of what shibori like patterns can look like. Now, our paper today doesn't have to look like any of this. I just wanted to take a moment to kind of talk about and show some examples of traditional shibori dyeing. Now, when I talk about pulling some inspiration from that, I definitely want to kind of go through different ways that we can fold and bend and twist our paper to get some fun designs with it. The truth is, this process today is about experimentation and play. And I know normally when we talk about play, we talk about play that children do, but the truth is adults need to play too. Our play just looks a little different. Our play involves exploring and experimenting and kind of pushing the material and see what we can get with it, how that'll turn out. So I definitely want to invite that kind of play in our practice today. So If you haven't heard of Shibori before, I definitely recommend looking it up and seeing some of the beautiful patterns and designs that you can get with this fiber dyeing practice. And like I said, we're going to pull some inspiration from that today when we actually get in our process. Now, to talk about supplies, the main thing that we're going to be using, two main supplies. One is paper. Now, I've got a variety of paper here. The truth is, because we're experimenting today and kind of playing around, bring in whatever paper you have around you. Some of the examples that I have are some cotton paper, some coffee filters. I have a dictionary page, paper towels, tissue paper, and copy paper. Different type of paper is kind of fun to play around with because you'll notice that the pigment reacts differently with the different textures and materials. So if you have a variety of paper with you, go ahead and pull that out. If all you have is like copy paper or notebook paper, know that that is perfect too. We can have some fun prepping our paper with that as well. Right, so we're going to be using a variety of paper today. The next thing I want to talk about are the pigments. Right? So I'm going to talk about a lot of pigments today and spend a little time going through how to prep our pigments. Okay? So the first thing I have, and I'm going to walk through this slower in just a moment, but I'm going to kind of list out the supplies first. The first one I have is liquid watercolor. This one is really great. The difference between this watercolor and a regular watercolor palette is that this is a really concentrated pigment, right? Everything that we're going to be talking about today, we're going to be adding water to, just so it's easier to kind of soak into the paper. Liquid watercolor is a great one to start with because of how concentrated that pigment is. But I know not everybody has liquid watercolor, and that's okay. There are other options too. I'm going to talk a little bit about how to take acrylic paint and turn that into a watercolor texture. We do that by adding water to it. So even if you don't have the liquid watercolor, you can create a watercolor by using acrylic paint. Now, we may not have any paint with us. Again, that's okay. We can actually go into our kitchen and pull out some things too to get some pigments. One is some food coloring. This is really great to use for fiber dyeing. It does so, or for paper dyeing, because it does soak up in the paper really well. And we typically have some food coloring in our pantry. The one thing that I will say that's helpful is whenever you're working with food coloring, of course, you need that water. But sometimes there's a little bit of dish soap can kind of help that mixture be a little thicker and kind of spread better. So I'll talk about that in a second as well. The other thing is using spice like turmeric. If you've ever used turmeric before in cooking, you know that it is a very strong pigment. Ground turmeric can turn your fingers yellow just with like a little touch. So turmeric is a really great fiber dyeing supply, but it also works for paper as well as it does with fabric. So I'll talk about how to mix that up and use that in our process today. And then, of course, if you don't have any of that, you can still do this process by using something like washable markers. And I'll kind of walk through how to do that too. So whatever pigment you have, you can make this work. And like I said, we'll walk through every part of it step by step, but these are kind of the base color supplies that we're going to be starting with. I have some liquid watercolor, acrylic paint, food coloring, turmeric, and washable markers. You don't have to have all of these. Any type of color you have, if you only have one of them, that's perfect. If you want to try a couple out, that's also good too. But this is what I'm going to be using, my main colors today. Now, another supply that's really helpful when we're doing our paper dyeing today are little containers. I've got these little yogurt cups that I just save, and I use those for like little watercolor cups when I'm painting, but they're going to be perfect today to mix pigment. Now, with every color that I'm talking about today, we're going to be adding water to them. And so having a little cup, whether it's a yogurt cup, a blue cheese container, a bowl, whatever you have around will work for this process today. So let's start off by prepping some of our materials. So I'm going to move these out of the way. I'm going to start off talking about our liquid watercolor. So this is the liquid watercolor I'm using. I'm not a big fan of talking about specific brands. This is just one I've had for a few years. Liquid watercolor is really nice to work with. Like I said, because it's really concentrated, So you can water it down and use it for a variety of things. So this is what I'm going to be using today. I'm going to pick two colors. And just to start this one, I'm going to add some liquid watercolor, and then I'm going to add some water to kind of water it down, dilute it a little bit so it'll go through that paper nice. So I'm going to add a little bit, and there's no exact measurement. I definitely want to invite measuring with your heart. So you can pick whatever amount feels good. You can see I've just got a little bit here, and I'm just going to add some water. It's just basically room temperature water. It can be right out of the faucet. It can be cold. So I'm going to do two colors. I'm going to do a blue and a green. And you can do different amounts. One of the things I want to highlight while I'm pouring this is that whatever container you're mixing it in, you want to make sure it's wide enough so we can dip our paper in. So these little containers are perfect. I'm going to set those aside. Those are our liquid watercolor. So if you're using liquid watercolor, that's basically the way to prep that, right? And because it's liquid watercolor, it mixes with that water very easily, so you don't have to go in and do a whole bunch of mixing. Now, the next one I want to talk about is turning our acrylic paint into kind of a watercolor material. So what I'm going to do, I've got two color or containers here. So I'm going to do a red. There we go. I'm going to do a little red for one. So I'm just going to scoop out a little acrylic paint and then add some water. And again, I'm not doing a whole bunch. You can see it's just a little dab of that, and then adding a little water to it. And then I can just mix that in. And again, I'm using just like a room temperature water, so it's not something that's super cold. It doesn't have to be warm. You just want to kind of mix that in. You can see just a little mixing right there does a lot of blending. What's nice about acrylic paint is that you can use it while it's nice and thick, or you can water it down and have that kind of watercolor texture. You get some really nice looks by varying the amount of water, or nice colors, by varying the amount of water that you put in that pigment. So that's one way to kind of make it a little watered down. Change the texture. And I'm going to do another one. I'm going to do a green. Nope, I'm going to do a pink. So again, I'm just going to do the same thing. Get a little scoop of it. Add some water. Just do a little mixing, that same type, just kind of mixing in. And I want to make sure that I'm adding enough water that it will kind of soak up my paper so I can use it more than once. Soak into the paper. So if you have acrylic paint and that's all you have, watering it down just a little bit is a good way to get that kind of dye mixture to color our papers. So that's that acrylic paint. The next one I want to talk about is going to be our food coloring. So this one I'm going to do two colors. I'm going to do a green and a yellow. I've got a little dish soap in here, and just to help kind of thicken it up some because it is already really liquidy, but you don't have to do that. And again, I'm just going to kind of measure with my heart here. Pour some of that food coloring in. I'm going to do it to both of them here. And still add water. Water is important when it comes to any type of fiber dyeing, whether you're doing a pre-soak or like a dip dye or anything like that. It just kind of helps that pigment really get into that material. The water helps it soak up really nicely. So I'm mixing in that food coloring with a little water. I'm going to do it with my two colors here. So if all you have is food coloring, you can still have fun colors to do some fiber dyeing with. Now, the next one I want to talk about is doing a spice like turmeric. Now, this is the only one where the temperature of the water is important. When you're doing something that's like granule like this, you want to do warm water. So it'll help that kind of pigment dissolve into the water a little easier. So again, I'm not going to do a huge amount. Again, I'm going to measure with my heart. And then add some warm water, and it's warm right out of the tap. So it's not like boiling water or anything like that. So I'm just going to pour in some warm water here. I will say I use turmeric more for art projects than I do for cooking. It's such a good pigment to work with, and you can see how bold that color is already. And with turmeric, a little bit of ground turmeric goes a long way. That warm water, I'm just kind of mixing in so some of those granules dissolve. And then the last one we're going to prep are our markers, which doesn't need prepping. It's just like this, markers prepped. So these are our supplies. If you have one of these or multiples of these, I definitely want to encourage trying out some of the different ones, again, experimenting with it. But I've got liquid watercolor, I've got watered down acrylic, I've got food coloring, I've got spices, turmeric, and then I've got markers. So I'm going to be demoing with all of them so you can kind of see how it turns out. If you only have one with you, that's great too. But I definitely want to encourage experimenting. Okay. All right. Now, to start off, I'm going to talk about preparing our fiber. Like I said, we've got some cotton paper, some coffee filters, found paper, paper towels, copy paper, tissue paper, all sorts of fun stuff to play around with. And so I'm going to start off by doing something very basic, starting with a paper towel. Paper towels are super absorbent, and so you can have some fun playing around with pattern here. Now I'm going to show an example of some other stuff before we get started in the folding. And these are some examples of how these might turn out. And this is using a variety of supplies too. Sometimes you get kind of a faded look. Sometimes you get detail, but those patterns start to show up. And these make perfect materials for other projects. I'll go through and save all my old art pieces or even my paper towels that maybe had too much pigment on them that were really for cleaning up. Those are still perfect for making other art prompts, right? So I want to encourage, again, playing around, having some fun, and knowing that whatever comes, sometimes it's a lot of detail, sometimes it's a soft blending of color, but whatever comes, it can be like whatever shows up, there's still that surprise in the reveal. Whatever shows up can be really, really good. Right? Okay. So I'm going to start off by folding. Now, one of the ones that we talked about before was the Itajime. I showed an example of that. That was the accordion fold. And so I'm going to show how to do that with a piece of paper. I'm going to be using a paper towel, but any paper you have works. That Itajime fold is the accordion fold. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take our paper and we're going to just kind of fold it up like we're making a paper fan. I'm going to start on one end and just kind of fold it up a little bit. So I'm folding it up. And then because we're making that accordion fold, I'm going to fold it down for the next one. Give it a crease and then fold up. And then fold down. So we're doing that accordion fold. So what that looks like after we're done folding is this kind of zigzag pattern here. It's creating that accordion fold, that paper fan. Once we do one way, what we're going to do is turn our paper and do that accordion fold again. So we're going to start by folding it up and then folding it down underneath and then folding it up. Now, it doesn't matter how big your folds are. You can play around with how wide you want those squares to be or how narrow you want them to be. If you want them to be a square or a rectangle, there's a lot of ways to kind of play with this. If you want to do a triangle instead of a square, you can do that as well. But it's all about kind of repeating that fold. We want to make sure we're doing that zigzag, that accordion fold, because what that does is it gives us all these edges that can soak up that pigment. Right? When you do folding over, folding over, folding over, it's nice, but you only get basically one or two sides that touch the pigment. By doing that accordion fold, you have all these sides, all these folds that can soak up, right? So once you do that accordion fold, then we can do the dipping process. So I'm going to start over with liquid watercolor and just try that out. So I've got all my sides open. So I'm just going to pick one to kind of dip. So I'm just going to go in and dip one side. It doesn't have to be a lot, but you can see how quickly it's soaked up. Paper towels are super absorbent. right? So they'll soak up really quickly. So I'm going to kind of play around with some of the different pigments I have here. I started with blue. I'm going to go over to my food coloring and do some dipping there as well. And every time I add color, I'm going to give it a little squeeze. So I squeeze that yellow before I move it out. And so now I've got this lovely kind of two-colored look here. And it was just dipping corners in, right? And that blue that I started with kind of soaked up. The yellow, I did the opposite corner, it kind of soaked in too. And then you have this wonderful kind of mid-tone where those colors overlap and you get this really nice blend. So there's this shade of green that appeared, even though I didn't dip it in green, because that yellow and blue mixed, now I have this new color here. So I've got this really nice pattern. And that was just doing the opposite ends. Now with this process, you can dip all four corners in different colors and create a different design, right? So this one, just doing those opposite colors, I'm going to open it up so we can kind of see what that looks like, that accordion fold. And again, this is the paper towel, so it soaks up really well. But I'm just going to kind of open it up a little so you can see how it turned out. And you can see that Itajime fold, where it's the accordion fold, gives you these really nice kind of center patterns, and you get some really lovely color blends. Now, every time you do this fold, it may not turn out the same way, and that's okay. It can be different for sure. It's kind of what will happen is that you'll get these kind of mixes here. But sometimes if you're doing more than two colors, you'll have even another color that blends in there nicely too. So there's a lot of experiment that you can do with just that fold. Okay? I'm going to set that one aside and talk about another kind of fold too. So I'm going to bring in my cotton paper here. This is something a little different. It's not really a watercolor paper, but it is slightly thicker. With that paper towel, it was super absorbent, so it took a lot of that pigment right away. With something like this, it's a little thicker, so the color won't spread as easily, and that's okay. It's just one thing to kind of keep in mind. So we can do the accordion fold and kind of play around with how we do that fold. So I did tiny squares before. For this one, I'm just going to kind of fold in fourths, right? Do that folding up, right? Then folding under, and then folding up. And the truth is, it doesn't have to be the exact same size. That's the nice thing about this project is it doesn't have to be the same size. You're going to get a fun pattern however you want to do it. So I did that accordion fold to start. If I want to do that triangle, what I'm going to do instead of folding it up to create the square, I'm going to fold the corner over. I'm going to take one of the corners and fold it up so it creates this kind of point. Okay, so we're starting with this rectangle. I'm starting with the corner here, and I'm going to fold it up till it meets that top. And then I'm going to fold under. So I'm creating that zigzag pattern, but it's looking like a triangle instead of the square, right? So I started by doing that first fold, taking the corner and folding it up and giving it a crease. And then I'm going to fold it under. And then I'm going to take this corner here, the top corner, and fold it down to meet that bottom line. Give it a crease. So now I'm getting this kind of zigzag pattern here. I'm just going to continue that all the way down. Folding it back and forth, creating that triangle shape. And again, I just want to say it doesn't have to be exact. It can be loose. It can be kind of half the size. It doesn't have to be perfect, which is something that I find really nice about this process. You're going to get something fun with it. So you can see that my last one, when I fold it up, it doesn't go all the way. And that's okay. It doesn't have to. I'm going to leave it just like this. And I'm going to use my triangle here. And I'm going to dip it in my pigment again. Right? So I'm just going to take one end, pick whichever end I want. I'm going to do green here. Give it a little soak. And you see it kind of still soaks up. It's the watered down pigment. And this is the food coloring that I was playing with. You can see all the sides that color is soaked in, right? And it doesn't have to be long. And then I want to give it a little squeeze. I'm not wearing gloves today, but most of the pigment that we're using can come off with soap and water. It may stain us for a little while, but that's one thing to keep in mind too. If you have gloves, it might be good to use that too. But you want to squeeze it whenever you pull the pigment out because you don't want a whole lot of that pigment just sitting in that fiber. Giving it a little squeeze will also help that pigment soak in the fiber as well. So I'm going to do another color here. I think I'm going to go with pink. And this is the acrylic paint that's watered down. So I'm just going to give it a little soak, let it soak in there for just a moment. And again, it doesn't have to be too long. You'll give it that little squeeze. You can see even that little bit is starting to soak up some. Okay. And then I'm going to come back with my liquid watercolor here, and I'm going to soak in my other corner. You can play around with how many corners you want to soak, dip, how many you want to leave plain. Even leaving some without pigment is a really good idea too. You can see that pattern. So this is that thicker paper that I used. I'm going to open it up so we can see the design for something like this. And this was 3 colors. So you can kind of see again, you're getting that central pattern, right, from the Shibori fold, that Itajime, but you're getting these really nice details. It's something that's a little different from the paper towel that I did, but there's something that's still very similar about that kind of central color and those little like color blending that happens, right? Now, one of the things I also want to kind of talk about is how to do some of the other Shibori folds. One of the ones I talked about was the Bullseye pattern, which is creating those rings. And that's something you can do with paper as well. So I've got a coffee filter right here. And I'm just going to kind of walk through how to play around with that. And you can still do that Itajime, that accordion fold, with this, but when you're starting with a circle, sometimes it's hard to get that square shape in there. So you want to kind of play around with it. But to get that bullseye pattern, what we want to do is pick a spot. It can be in the center or anywhere, but pick it and pinch it. And so I'm just going to kind of pinch it so it gives me this cone shape. Okay. So I'm using the center of mine here, giving it a little pinch. So it kind of hangs down. This is that pinch, the center of it. This is where it's hanging down. And so one of the things that I can do is use a rubber band or twine. I'm going to use twine because I think that twine is going to be a little easier to cut off and all that. But what I'm going to do is just kind of tie it around. And this acts as a resist. So it changes the pattern, right? It changes what that looks like. So I'm just giving it a tight squeeze. So now when I dip, when I add my colors here, it can create that resist, which is a completely different pattern, right? So I'm going to cut some of that off. And then come back. I'm going to use some of my turmeric here. And I'm just going to take my fabric, or my fiber, sorry, and dip it in. And because it's a coffee filter, it's super absorbent. We don't need a lot, but I'm going to squeeze it. So I've got that color, and then I can dip the other color. I'm just going to do this one here so we can kind of see. Again, squeezing it out every time. So when we take that twine off, mine got a little loose. Usually you want it to be tighter. The tighter it is, the more resist pattern you're going to get from it. Mine got a little loose, so it may not show the best one. But when you open it up, you can have a really nice kind of color pattern there, right? You're outside. I have a little bit of a ring here. And then we've got that outer ring. This was just 2 colors. You can do it with a lot of like a lot of folds, a lot of colors there. It doesn't have to be just the 2. I'm going to talk about, I've been using the other pigment here, but I'm going to talk about how to use markers. Sometimes we don't have all these other pigments, and that's okay. If you have markers, you can still do this process in a fun way. So I'm going to do the coffee, I'm going to do the coffee filter again. And I'm going to do some folds. I'm going to start off by taking my coffee filter, and I'm just going to create a fold. I'm still pulling some inspiration from Shibori, and that the more folds you have, the more of a design you're going to have. So I'm just going to kind of play around with making up my own fold pattern today, just kind of folding it in little triangles. And then, yeah, I'm just going to do like that. So I've got little triangles here that I folded my piece in. And so I'm going to start off by I'm going to do yellow to start off with. And so what I'm going to do, this is just a regular washable marker. I'm just going to add some color to the tip right here, just on one side. I'm going to do a little orange next, and I'm just kind of coloring the top. You can see it doesn't have to be super filled in, just a little bit of color here. Now it reminds me of, what is that candy? Oh, candy corn. I was like, what is that candy? Reminds me of candy corn. So I've got my coffee filter, super absorbent, right? I've only got color on one side. You can color both sides if you want. But what we're going to bring in, if you're using markers, you can bring in water. Remember, all of our pigments, we're adding water to. We're going to add water to this one. And what's really nice about using something that's super absorbent, like a coffee filter, is that that water carries the pigment all the way through. So you can either do it by taking a brush and dropping water in. If you have a dropper, you can use it, or even a spray bottle, and just kind of give it a little spray. I'm just doing some spray with it. It doesn't have to be a whole lot, just giving it a little bit of a spray here. And you can see that water is already kind of blending that color. I'm going to do a little more water here, let it kind of soak down. And you can see that color is blending in, that yellow is blending into the orange is blending into the red. It's kind of this nice smooth transition of color. And when I flip it over, you can see that water is already carrying that pigment through. Remember, all I did was paint that top part and add water to it. So I can even come back here, add that water, so it helps soak up that pigment, right? And it kind of transfers that pigment. So when we do open it up, we get some really nice color blends all the way through. So I've got red on the outside, orange in the middle, and then yellow in that center. So we're having fun kind of playing around with that. And as it dries, you'll be able to see that color more all the way through. So all in all, this process is something, like I said, that can be centered around play and experimentation, seeing what different folds you can do, what different designs you can do, and explore with different papers. You know, I've talked about coffee filters. I've talked about like cotton paper, paper towels. You can do this with tissue paper too. So I'm going to just kind of make up my own fold again, just kind of doing some sort of random folds just to kind of create my own design here. Pulling again from inspiration from our Shibori tradition, just kind of creating all those sides with the different folds. And then I'm going to go in and just kind of dip the pigment, or dip our folded paper in our pigment. Okay. And again, it doesn't have to be a whole lot. A little bit goes a long way. Okay. You have that pigment already. I'm going to come over here. I'm going to use this green. I'll do two different types of greens. And even when you're experimenting with different pigments, even if you're doing the same colors, like this one is two different shades of green, you can open that up and get a really nice pattern from that. One of the things that I will say is the more fragile your paper is, the more you probably want to let it dry before you open it up. Okay? So if you're using something like copy paper or watercolor paper or something that's thicker, you can open it up right away if you want. But if you're doing something that's kind of fragile, like this tissue paper, or even that coffee filter, letting it dry just a little bit will make it easier to open up. So that's just kind of one thing to keep in mind too. You don't have to do that, but it does help because sometimes when it's wet, it'll stick to itself and it makes it hard to open up. Now, one of the things that I mentioned earlier was the Arashi, which is the wave pattern. And so typically what you do with that is you'll have a pole. I'm going to use a skewer as an example. But what I'm going to do is just kind of roll my paper around. I have a skewer here, but you can roll it around a pencil, a paintbrush, popsicle stick. But what I'm going to do is just kind of a loose roll all the way around, giving it a little roll. And I'm going to scrunch it together, rolling, scrunching, rolling, scrunching. So I have kind of a wad here. So it creates this pattern. Now, if you're doing fabric, then you'll take your twine or your rubber bands and fix it there. But because you're doing that scrunchy pattern, that's when you're going to get those waves. So you can either dip it in your pigment or you can do that marker with it and the spray bottle. Either works, but creating that scrunch is going to help. I'm going to use my blue here and just kind of dip it in there. Right? So I've dipped it in there. I'm going to give it a little ring out. Squeeze it. Then I'm just going to open it up. So what happens is that the side that's on the outside that was touching the pigment is getting more color, but the scrunches on the inside won't get as much. And that's how you create that kind of wave pattern. And that wave pattern is from like the darker color all the way to the light. So I'm just kind of unrolling it. I'm opening it up in a hurry so everybody can see, but you can definitely be more gentle than I am. And so what you'll see is that the darker color is here and it kind of fades out as it goes down to the white. And that's because the white was what was tightly wrapped around here and that darker color was on the outside. You can do that with marker too. You just have the marker, you can color that on and then spray it with a water bottle or dropper. And you'll create this pattern too. These specifically are really great. I like using these type of patterns for like prints, like if you do stamping or printmaking, these are perfect backgrounds. These are excellent for collage, and we'll be using them in upcoming weeks for different art journal prompts. But again, I do want to encourage playing with this. Try out your own folds. Maybe use some of these traditional folds that we talked about and try out making different pigments. Like I said, we used a variety of pigments today, from liquid watercolor to acrylic paint, food coloring, even spices and markers. There's so many more. You can use alcohol ink. You can use liquid acrylic. There's so many that you can use in this process. And I think there's something that's really fun about just kind of experimenting and testing. There's definitely something that's good for your brain when you do stuff like this. It is being creative. It's using our problem solving skills here. It's strengthening and exercising our brain, thinking about what can I use? How can I get a pattern? Can I repeat it? And so I definitely want to encourage that.